we're happy to welcome Christos Memis. He's the editor-in-chief of Protagon.gr, and he's a board member of GEN. And please clap your hand and just thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the early rise. I understand it's not so easy to be here early in the morning, at least for Greeks it's early. And especially if you were in Zapion yesterday, where we had this celebration with the guy there, the white-haired guy who entertained us. Thank you very much. Well, this is, as you know, last minute change in the program, because with Bertrand, we understood that being in Greece now, between two elections, you might feel that you need some more information of what is going on in this country this summer. Because this summer, for Greece, is a crucial summer. We had the European elections who changed the political scenery up, down. Syriza was defeated heavily. New Democracy, the center of the right party, is coming probably, as all the polls say, to power. And after 4 years and the economic crisis of 10 years, we have many things to discuss. And I think that half an hour is not much, but we'll try, my colleagues and I will try to help you understand what is going on. Let me introduce them. On my left is Alexis Papachillas, the editor-in-chief of Kathimerini, a respected daily newspaper and also a media company, big media company. On my right is Angelos Kouveos, political editor of Tovima, the other respected Greek newspaper. There are these two mainly, for many years, the most respected papers. And there is Apostolos Mangiriadis from Sky TV, and it's also a very good TV station. And I'll give the microphone to Alexis to explain to us what happened in 26th of May, not in Europe generally, but in Greece especially, because this is important.
Thank you, Christo. Thank you for this opportunity to be here today. It's a bit early in the morning, especially for a Greek summer weekend. But I'll try to give you a snapshot of what I think is going on in this country. But I think we need a bit of context. Basically, you know, you all know about the economic crisis of Greece. People have lost about 25% of their income. We've lost 25% of our GDP in 8 or 9 years. This is a very dramatic shift. People lost any kind of hope. People got exhausted. They got very, very angry. And Greece has basically been through everything else that the rest of the West, Europe and the US, has gone through in the recent years. What I mean by that is, you know, if you take any kind of phenomenon we all occupy ourselves with, Yellow Jacket protests, we've had them for many years here down in the main square of, downtown square of Athens, you know, for every day. People were demonstrating outside the parliament. We had the blossoming of the social media in the beginning of the crisis in 2009, 2010, when people basically lost any kind of faith or trust in mainstream media and also in the mainstream political system. We even had a referendum way before the Brits had theirs. And I think basically one thing we learned through all these years, because they were very hard years, especially for us and for me running a newspaper, it was almost like the perfect storm. Because we had to deal with the financial crisis, We had to deal with a structural crisis that every newspaper is facing around the world. You paid a lot of attention to this in the last couple of days. And we also had a huge political and social turmoil. One thing I learned from all this is the need to listen. We do a lot of talking as journalists, but basically, I think we were missing the point. We lived in our own bubble, in the elite bubble, let's say. And that's why back in 2012, for example, when the whole political situation went upside down, when we had Syriza, which was a very anti-systemic leftist party back then, when we had Golden Dawn, the neo-Nazi party getting quite a bit of strength, we completely missed that. We didn't see it coming. We were almost like the New York Times and the Washington Post, when they didn't see Trump coming. So this was a big lesson for us, that we really have to learn the art of listening. It's not easy, but we have to. Now, what has been happening in the last year, I think, is that people have really gotten very tired. They want some stability, they want some normalcy. And we are coming out of this populist extremism, populism, nationalism, all this phase that we went through for the past few years. Maybe we were, the first in the cycle in some ways. So I think it's like very refreshing that even though we had this huge migration crisis, even though we had this huge economic crisis, the country is still standing on its own feet. We're very close to civil war, but we didn't go down that slippery path. And I think people have gotten more mature, let's say, in the last couple of years. They've realized there's no other way except for, staying in the Eurozone and being part of Europe. It's really amazing to me that after all this, the euro is still very popular. It has about 65% of support. And I think that's very remarkable. Now, what happened in the election, in the last election? New Democracy, which is a very traditional conservative party, was first with quite a big difference. Syriza suffered a big defeat. They were almost 10 points behind. More remarkable, in my opinion, is that the fact that Golden Dawn lost about half of its strength. And this is really good news in this country. Even though I have to put the disclaimer there, which is, to me, it's a bit, it's a matter of concern that the Golden Dawn is still very popular with the youth. They got about 5%, but when you look at the exit poll data, they still have like 15% of among the ages of 17 to 24. And I think this is something that we have to pay some attention to, and something also you can explain easily when somebody, will tell you that the youth unemployment numbers are still up up to the 40 or 50%. So I think, in some ways, the country will become a bit more boring. There will be less of you coming here, to cover the country, at least for a while. The prediction is that New Democracy is going to win with quite a big majority. I think Syriza has become a much more mainstream party than it used to be. In foreign policy, in economic policy, they have become much more realistic. And in my view, this is a good thing. It's a healthy kind of development. And they have to go through this period of self-analysis, and maybe they're going to reach some interesting conclusions. And therefore, I actually believe that we're going to enter a phase of relative normalcy. We'll go through some reforms, which I think are needed. And let me just conclude by saying that one thing we have proven as Greeks is that we have a real resilience. I always kid my British friends, who are in despair now. And I tell them the difference between us and them is that we don't take our institutions too seriously. We're too flexible. We've been around for 2,000 years, and we know how to deal with this kind of crisis. So even, we had a referendum. They take it seriously. They don't want to change the result. We voted no, which meant yes. And that's quite something. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Alexis. I'll be back to you. I would like to ask Angelos Koveos, what let's be a little bit more analytical about the defeat, the incoming, as we can see it. First, the defeat in the European elections, now the incoming defeat of Syriza. How this party who was running the country for 4.5 years steadily is in this mess now. Why that?
Thank you and good morning. My explanation is quite simple to that. I think for the past 4 years, or maybe 6 or 7 years, we have taken Syriza and Alexis Tsipras very seriously. We always thought, okay, this is the left coming, they will save the country. Alexis Tsipras is a political star on the rise. He has a magic touch. He would do anything. He would shift any situation in any way possible. He had the luck to govern the country for 4 years, 4.5 years, no, 4 years, without any other election on his way, either a presidential election or a communal election or whatever. After 4 years, the Greeks came to vote. They suffered everything possible, and the years before that. They got fed up with a lot of things. They got fed up with lies. They got fed up with somebody insulting them all the time in any possible way, be it the government or the opposition or any other possible party. So, after 4 years, Alexis Tsipras and Syriza thought they wouldn't lose the election with such a huge difference they did. There were people in his party telling him, do it all at once, all 3 elections. He didn't listen to them. He thought, okay, I'll do my best. I'll have the best possible result in the European election, and then I go all the way to a national election in October. They didn't have an idea what was coming up to them. And I think this shows a lot. Syriza is not a party in a traditional way. I mean, the way people think it is, even in Greece, but outside Greece especially. It's not, that may sound a bit bizarre, but it's not a party rooted in the Greek society. It was a political force on the rise because of the crisis. It didn't solve the problems it promised to solve. And that's why this happens now. I think, to put it in one sentence, I think we had 4 years of political nonsense, not only because Syriza, because of other people as well, of other parties. But now it's the end of it. And I think the most interesting phenomenon in this election in Greece is that New Democracy is on the rise again, a party for many people the years before responsible for the crisis. But you have no party gatherings, you had a very quiet city, you had nobody celebrating a party victory, which to me is the most optimistic thing about what is happening now. We'll see what comes next, but this is the situation as I see it, and I think there is a bit of hope now.
Christos, can I please offer a politically psychological approach?
Yeah, I'll give you a chance to do that. But I want to clarify for our foreign audience, because some things are Greek to you. I have to explain that whoever, if you don't know it, in 26th of May, we had the European elections, and we also had the regional and city hall elections, which is also a very important factor in our political life. And in these elections, Syriza was also crushed. New Democracy, in the second round, he succeeded to control 12 of the 13 regional governments in Greece. That's a point you have to have in mind on what happened. And the second thing I have to clarify is that when you speak about Tsipras, is Syriza. Syriza is the party, the governing party, just for the record. So you have an explanation, but I expect from you also, because that's what I had in my mind, to try to read the future. I mean, we have the incoming government, what problems they might inherit from Syriza and what lies ahead. Please.
Absolutely. Let me touch upon a little bit on what Alexis and Angelos said. I had a friend calling me from Brussels the other day, in the aftermath of the European elections. He asked me, he said, I've been following the Greek financial crisis over the last 10 years, and please explain to me the result with New Democracy winning with a landslide. And I told him that in my view, in my sense, well, societies are also, in a sense, when they go to vote, we're trying to examine their psychological situation. So I tried to use the example from the science of psychology, which is the 5 stages of grief. And I said back in 2009, when the financial crisis broke, the Greek people and the Greek society was on the stage number 1, which is denial. We all voted for George Papandreou, whose basic motto was, money exists, compared to what Karamanlis would say, that we have to impose some kind of austerity in the country. And then in 2012, that was the years of anger, the second stage of grief, when we saw Golden Dawn rising and Syriza rising, and even the party Independent Greeks, that was one of the most significant successes of this crisis. And then the third stage was negotiation. And we had this infamous 6 months led by Yanis Varoufakis and his stylish negotiations that ended nowhere, that ended up with a referendum, actually. That costed 100 billion, whatever, some other people say 200 billion. But still, after Tsipras signed his own memorandum, we were on the 4th stage. The Tsipras memorandum was the harshest of all the other 3, but the society was on the 4th stage, and that's the stage of depression, that we saw no demonstration on the streets whatsoever. No one cared. And then we're at stage 5 right now, and we're on the stage of acceptance, that people realized that there was no alternative. And we've been 10 years in the crisis. We've lost 25% of our GDP. We had huge unemployment percentages, but there's still hope. And as Alexis said, there's resilience in the society, and things are coming back to normal. So that leads me to your question, Christos. I think there are 3 things that Mitsotakis is now, he will be challenged on 3 various issues. Number 1 is whether he will restore confidence in the economy, and the investments will be coming back. That's one thing. He will be elected on the basis that he will offer some tax breaks. He will offer tax breaks both to small and middle-sized companies and also to households. Number 2 is the institutional changes that he is facing, the constitution change, the way that he will govern within his own party, because don't forget that Mitsotakis is not, he was the underdog during his primaries, and he's not supported by his party as the way that previous presidents were supported. And the third issue is what economical and political landscape he will be functioning in over the next 4 years, in terms of how Europe will come back, whether he will face any other recession. So I think most of the part, he will definitely get the majority vote in the parliament. I can bet on that. And the good thing, as Angelo said, he only has he won't have any other elections during his tenure, and I think that he has all the chances with him.
Yeah, thank you. I'll ask Alexis to explain to our audience what Mitsotakis, if he is elected as we expect, will confront in terms of foreign policy. We have Turkey. Turkey is a very serious problem for us for centuries, not years, and so on and so on. Please.
Okay, let me just say 2 quick things about the economic situation. One very important point is our creditors, with the assistance of Germany, they have placed a straitjacket on Greece, which is a mandatory 3.5% of primary surplus, which means Greece every year has not only to balance its budget, but it has to put aside 3.5% of the GDP in order to pay the debt. And this is a real unhealthy straitjacket. Tsipras tried to get rid of it via the Varoufakis game theory of blackmail or whatever. He failed. And I think Mitsotakis will try at some point to do the same, because otherwise he cannot do the tax cuts and everything else. That's going to be a very difficult challenge, in my opinion. And the second thing is, what the new government wants to do is things like this building here. You cannot imagine what kind of effort and problems went, on before this whole project was completed, because, nobody wanted it for many years, even though there was a foundation that wanted to pay, for the whole thing. And now we're all very proud of it. This current government, which was very opposed to this, is now very supportive. And in my opinion, there's great potential in this country. If you look south of here, there's like an amazing waterfront, which has been undeveloped for years. If you turn this around and you turn it into a Barcelona kind of waterfront, with some restrictions so you don't have the problems Barcelona is facing, you could really add like a couple of points to the GDP. These are the kinds of things that Mitsotakis wants to do. It will not be easy. There's a lot of red tape here. There's a lot of vested interests that don't want this kind of thing. That will be the big challenge. Now, foreign policy, Mitsotakis was very opposed to an agreement that this government signed with our neighbors in the north, North Macedonia. That will be a challenge for him, because the Europeans want North Macedonia to eventually become a member of the EU. He'll have to do his own somersault in terms of this. It will not be easy, because his party is really, very tough, very militant on this issue. I think this will be one of his first challenges. The second challenge, of course, has to do with Turkey. We have a very unpredictable neighbor. Erdogan is facing huge economic pressure. He will have to face a dilemma. As you know, there's this thing where he will have to decide whether he's going to get these missiles, the S-400 from the Russians, or get the F-35s he has paid for from the US. And this is coming up soon. He will have to make up his mind. And at the same time, he's challenging both Cyprus and Greece in terms of their rights to explore some of the natural resources that exist in our seas and all this. And the problem is that the asymmetry between Greece and Turkey in terms of the military situation is really devastating for Greece because of the economic crisis. I mean, Greece has really stayed, behind in terms of this. So that's, I think, quite a big challenge. And it's more challenging because you don't really know what the US is going to do. I mean, who knows what, Trump administration will do if something happens between Greece and Turkey. In the old days, you pretty much knew what was going to happen. Now it's a personal thing. Maybe the in-laws of both Trump and Erdogan, will communicate, through a back channel or something. It's not like the old, it's a black box now for us. And this is something of concern.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexis. We have the chance, I would prefer, we have 3 minutes and 3 minutes and 16 seconds. Let's have 1 or 2 questions, please. Yes, please. She's not prepared for you. My friend from Al-Ahram.
Yes. Huh. Your friend from Al-Ahram, Christos.
Yeah. You were here for many years working as a correspondent. You have to tell this to people.
Exactly. Yeah, I was here for 5 years as a correspondent, but that was long ago, 25 years ago. So first of all, I would like to know if Tsipras was able to solve any, somehow, not completely, or his achievements, in fact, when it comes to the debt problem. Was he able to do any good things at all? This is first. Secondly, do you believe that changing the government and Nea Demokratia, if they will win, would have a better opportunity to solve this problem? And thirdly, speaking of Turkey and Greece under Tsipras while being in power, there is some regional cooperation with Egypt and Cyprus. So do you believe such cooperation or that's something related to Tsipras and the way he thinks, or it's more related to the Greek national security in other ways. Will it last later, or it might be over?
You got 2 minutes asking.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I think Alexis will answer just the one because it's of interest for you. The collaboration, the axis between Egypt, Israel, Cyprus, and Greece against Turkey. That's all. 1 and 20 for you.
Okay, very quickly. Back in 2010, the Papandreou government, which was a socialist government, started this cooperation initially between Israel, Cyprus, and Greece. And then Egypt was brought in at some point, as a separate, of course, ally, but it was brought in. And this was continued by the governments that followed. For us, it was quite astounding that Tsipras was demonstrating, he was supporting the Gaza flotillas and all this, he did a complete turnaround and he became a very loyal supporter of this alliance. He's very close to Bibi Netanyahu now. They become very good friends. For us, it was something, quite remarkable, and I think this will obviously continue with the next government. I mean, for us, one of the most amazing things is the Israelis were asking for a radar in Greece for their own purposes. No government dared give it to them, and then this leftist Syriza government decided to give it to them, which is something remarkable.
Thank you.
No, we have only 10 seconds, and I want to pass the exams for next year. You'll give me the panel again next year. We are finished. Well, if you have any other questions, we would like to meet you outside or somewhere and discuss. Thank you very much.
Please do.
Thank you very much.
Technologies, and now his own company, and he will talk in a very concrete way of how we could use algorithm to foster democracy and to foster quality journalism. So please welcome with a big applause, Krishna Bharat. Thank you.
What a fabulous venue. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm a computer scientist by training. For the last 20 years, I've been working with online news using computers, and I've also been working with people who are intensely involved with news in one capacity or the other. So I was at Google, and in 2015, I left Google, and since then I've been independent. I teach at Stanford. I'm no longer affiliated with Google. And I'm able to observe this intersection between technology and journalism from kind of a neutral perspective with my unique history. And, it gives me goosebumps to be here in the city that invented democracy, that ancient system of governance that is still, I think, one of the best things the world has. It's with all its faults, with all its messiness, and the fact that it's under attack now by disinformation and dictators and populists who would like to destroy the institutions that underpin it. It is still surviving, and it is something that I would like to protect. And it's an honor to be here to talk about defending democracy, protecting democracy, and strengthening the core of democracy with you via journalism. And if you think about it, it's the only system of government where the public can control their own destiny, can fire the government if they're not happy with them, and install a new one. And it requires two things. One is free and fair elections, and the other is an informed public who actually know what's happening in their community, in their city, in their country, in the world, and understand the issues that are actually impacting them, and learn to ignore the issues that are not impacting them. And in order to do this, they depend on you. You are what provide them the information that they allow them to make the right decision about who to elect. And that's why the work we do here in this room is so important. Thus far, we've talked a lot about how AI is part of the problem. AI can actually subvert democracies, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But today, I'm mainly here to talk about what AI can do positively for democracy. And to give you a small example of that from my own history, in Google News, we use AI to bring news from around the world to a single place where you can browse multiple perspectives, maybe an Arab and an Israeli perspective on an issue, or from Washington Post and Fox News. And the advantage of bringing news from around the world, from different perspectives to one place, is that it makes the process of reading broadly very efficient. So you encourage people to read broadly. It allows any falsehood from one source to be contradicted by other sources. And also allows you to understand the different narratives so that you can step back and observe the story independent of any one narrative, because individual narratives can be deceptive. So even though a publisher is not lying to you, they can give you a selective view of the truth. They can say it looks like a circle, or they can say it looks like a square, but in practice, in reality, you step back, you see it's different. It looks like a cylinder. And ultimately, I think this is what Google News accomplishes. It creates a more informed public. It ultimately protects democracy. But Google News cannot do more than what the media is providing. So having a healthy media ecosystem is super important. And having the media cover the right things in the right way is also super important. So this is what I'm going to talk about. One thing we are fighting against is 2 million years of evolutionary baggage. For the last 2 million years, we've lived in small communities as hunter-gatherers in a small geographical neighborhood where we knew everybody. And we had very few inputs. When somebody told you they saw leopard tracks, and 2 people told you that, you assumed there is a leopard around. And you were probably right. You picked up your spear. Now somebody tells you that in Mexico there are gangs, or something else is happening somewhere else in the world. People in small-town America get very afraid, even though it has nothing to do with them. It's not relevant to them, and they have never met a Mexican. What I'm trying to tell you is that in the 2 million years, as our brain evolved, it learned to use very few inputs and build theories, assuming that those inputs are actually accurate. The last 10,000 years since farming, and we started living in larger communities, and we've become more globalized, and we're getting inundated with news and misinformation, and people with devious agendas, our hardware has not been upgraded. We're still running that same brain that was doing the right thing in the former environment. So just like in any AI system, the inputs you give decide what model gets built. So this is where I think we have an incredible responsibility. As journalists, our responsibility is to help our public build a true and accurate model of the world they live in. True and accurate model that they can use to make judgments. And in part, this is skewed because of misinformation, but it can also be skewed because of what we cover, the choices we make. So to illustrate this, I'm going to show you this chart. On the left are the things that are actually killing Americans: heart disease, cancer, road accidents, and so forth. Terrorism is vanishingly small. Now here are the 2 of the sources I trust most in the world: New York Times and Guardian. Over a 17-year period, they discovered that the coverage of terrorism was 35% relative to the others. Why is this happening? It's because they're responding to a market need. If it bleeds, it leads. It's also easier to cover than healthcare. You know, the healthcare narrative is complicated. It requires extensive analysis. Terrorism is easier to cover. But it also makes terrorism more likely to cover it. So if we have a problem here, you know, if it bleeds, it leads is good in the short run for the publisher, but it's terrible for democracy. So the way to fix this is twofold. We have to strengthen the immune system of democracy by fighting back against misinformation that comes from AI. We also have to strengthen the core of journalism by making it cost-effective to do solid journalism at a low price with the help of technology. Okay, so what might that involve? But first, let's talk about how AI distorts reality. You've seen many examples of this, and maybe some solutions here in this conference. OpenAI has a text generator that can create fake news at will. Faces on the internet may not be real people. You can manufacture people. You can also fake video, deep fakes. You can also change the speech that somebody uttered. All of this is happening and will happen because a lot is riding on this. There's a lot of money chasing it. And you know it would happen whether or not there was AI. People will figure out a way to do it, right? And a case study on this was the Indian election that just happened. It's been called the WhatsApp election. India is the biggest market for WhatsApp. I think there are 250 million subscribers. And it was widely reported that in this opaque network, there were a lot of memes flowing that were patently false. Candidates being accused of saying things they did not say. Communal violence being created, and so on and so forth. And not necessarily with sophisticated technology, but it's going to get worse. And the part of the problem is large part of India is illiterate, and access to high bandwidth has suddenly leapt in the last 5 years. It went from 125 million to 512 million broadband users. So people who have never been exposed to the internet for the first time are getting broadband, image memes and video memes. And our evolutionary baggage says, seeing is believing. If somebody shows it to you, it doesn't matter who the messenger is, you have to believe it because you see it. And if we fall for it, these people certainly will fall for it. And it's extremely cost-effective to program the public this way for millicents per citizen. So this is the problem we are facing. Of course, there are ways to tackle this using technology. So on a social network, the best way to fight false news, false memes, is to actually have the company that owns the network and has kind of the God's eye view of what's happening, look at the data and build models on top of it. So in this example, if somebody propagated a meme and it took 2 different paths through the network, that meme, substantially the same way, is going to be propagated by a number of people. And having observed this and realized that all of these paths, in fact, represent the same payload, and looking at the rate at which that payload is being distributed, the social network can actually detect that something is happening, especially if the people who are forwarding it are the people who forwarded false news in a previous instance. It doesn't matter whether it is a textual article, or it's a video, or it's an image. Just observing the pattern of sharing and the rate at which it's being spread, and the fact that credible sources are not spreading it, allows an AI model to detect that this is suspicious. Of course, AI models cannot take decisions on their own. They might slow this down, but ultimately you have to go to fact checkers to resolve this. And again, technology can help with fact checking. I'm sure there are lots of examples here in the past, but it comes down to either extracting claims or verifying whether this video happened before, or looking at other attributes of the video or image that tell you whether this was true or fake. But it is an arms race. Even as AI starts finding ways to debunk these things, there's going to be an increased effort to try and manufacture them in a way that cannot be debunked. So this is a huge problem. The other challenge we have is that in WhatsApp, as we saw, the network is opaque. That means even Facebook cannot see what's being sent. But frankly, if something is being shared by 10,000 people or 100,000 people, it's hard to argue that it's private information. At some point, it has to cross the limit where we have to say, Facebook, this is public. Let's take a look at it. Let's figure out if it's misinformation. Let's stop it. As we saw in that previous example, there are signals that tech platforms have that only they have. And these can be used to protect democracy, to support journalism, if there's collaboration between tech platforms and the civil society. So I'm going to ask the question, can we do this in other instances? Newsrooms lack the capacity right now to do original research in AI. So most of it comes from technology companies. And they're not necessarily developing it with journalism in mind, But if we ask for the right artifacts, and if we apply it correctly, perhaps we can take what's already being developed and make it very effective for journalism. So let's talk about enabling civil discourse. Okay? So in order to engage the public, we have to listen to the public. But the public, it's not clear who the public is, because the common threads, social networks are full of monsters. We don't know who's behind the mask, and whether they're real or whether they're robots. One of the best things about the internet is that everybody has a voice. Everybody can be heard. The tragedy of the internet is everybody has a voice. And everybody wants to be heard. And in particular, there are monsters, there are manipulators, there are marketers, and they have a louder voice than anybody else. So ordinary people who have something to contribute, who you want to connect with, are no longer able to be heard. And this is a problem. If you cannot connect with the audience, you have a problem. Some people have suggested that identity is a solution. But identity can be manufactured. It's not necessary. And many people are now reluctant to reveal who they are because of harassment and other reasons. So I would argue that what we want is authenticity. What is authenticity? It's knowing that this person is a real person. They actually exist. It's knowing something about them. It's knowing whether they live in the geographical area we're talking about, what their political persuasion is, and so on and so forth. Things they want to reveal about themselves that convince us that this person needs to be heard. So in this comment thread on Brexit, you will encounter a lot of opinions. It's hard to know who is real and who is a troll, right? But if you give the audience the opportunity to state who they are and have it be proven, then you have a different view. So if the AI is able to help this person say, I'm a real person, I'm a UK resident, I'm a woman, then I want to listen to her. I don't want to listen to all the other people who may or may not be real, who may or may not be local, whose perspectives may be concocted to manipulate me, right? This is kind of what I want to achieve. But can we do this? Of course we can. Because the kinds of information we're talking about already exist. I carry around a phone with me all the time. The accounts I have with Amazon, with Google, with Facebook have been there for, decades. So surely they know me. In fact, they do. And I should be able to assert that I'm a real person, right? They know my name, they know my location, they know my gender, they know my interests. And beyond that, they know a lot more that they could compute using AI models if they wanted to. My friends, my work, my education, my politics, my religion, my marital status, what kinds of things I purchase, my ethnicity, and also my interactions online, whether I'm polite, whether I'm a troublemaker, whether I'm obnoxious. So if they already know this, and they know this because they use it to market things to me, they use it to drive messages to me, why not empower me to use this to my advantage? So consider this woman, right? People are already targeting her with messages because she's a woman, because she lives in Texas, because she's Catholic, because she's Republican. It's already happening. Why not give her the opportunity to lean in and say, hey, I have something to say. And here are the things I want to be able to assert about myself so that I can listen to her and respect her. Now, there are many ways to implement this, and I'm not going to talk about them. But ultimately, it comes down to an alliance between technology companies and publishers to figure out how to empower the audience to connect better with journalists, right? Using the signals that the tech companies already have. The same kind of knowledge and collaboration can allow for advanced forms of personalization. So, imagine that you're Swissinfo in Switzerland, and you're talking to what you think is the Swiss audience about cancer, right? But you could have a much more subtle logic here and how to generate this article. If somebody's in Switzerland, they have one title. If they're not in Switzerland, they have a different title. If they're male, you insert statistics about prostate cancer. If female, you talk about breast cancer statistics. This is some work we did at Stanford with journalists from TA Media, and it's incredibly effective. You could also do this for a geographical neighborhood, because that's something that can be automatically customized. As you syndicate content out, you could localize it to a given neighborhood based on attributes of that audience. One AI technology I'm super excited about, I think which is going to revolutionize our field, is speech. Our ability to understand what is being spoken, our ability to manufacture speech. Some of you may have seen in Google I/O, Sundar Pichai showed an example of the Google Assistant, where the Google Assistant was able to talk to a hairdresser, book an appointment, and make very natural conversation, and the other person did not even know they were talking to AI, right? And the advantage of having AI be able to listen to our conversation as journalists talking to a source and participate is that now you have a buddy. You have a buddy who has access to the world's information again and tell you in real time what you should know, right? So transcription services are becoming better. So here you have an example of Steve Jobs and Bill Gates being interviewed. And I've been watching the transcript. It's been getting better over the years. Imagine a situation where this transcript is being created in real time in a super accurate way with lots of annotations. Yes. The time is coming. Accuracy, in laboratory conditions is coming up to like 95%, which is kind of what you would expect from a layman listening to a conversation. In field testing, it's somewhat lower, but it is going to get better. And one way in which we as humans are able to follow what's happening is by understanding the domain. I'm going to talk later about how AI can improve speech recognition accuracy, but there are many exciting things that this can enable. One thing it can do is when you shoot a video and you want to turn that into something that you want to then broadcast, you can take the transcript as a starting point and edit it in a very lightweight way and produce derivative video clips or audio clips very quickly. And this is something that folks at Stanford have been working on, and it's impressive what it can do. Another thing it can enable, the Google I/O demo I was talking about, is scalable interviews. Right? There's a lot of shoddy journalism where people talk to 5 or 10 people and say, hey, I have a theory about how this is working. Right? But to really understand healthcare, to really understand Brexit, Yellow Vest, you have to talk to tens of thousands of people. And it's not cost-effective to do that. But perhaps AI can help, right? So you can imagine a situation where an AI person on your phone is able to talk to you, interview you, and based on what you say, is able to tailor the conversation so that they get the most out of the interview, right? It's low friction, it can be compelling, and in the limit, it can be actually a form of entertainment. Talking to this AI assistant that is quite responsive, that is able to make conversation with you and give you feedback. So getting feedback from 1 million people may be possible in a cost-effective way, in a decade from now. Another thing I'm excited about is the possibility of what I call a reporter's notebook 2.0. Yeah? For the longest time, we've still been taking notes the same way. We've still been getting inputs from our sources the same way. Why can't AI make a difference? And of course it can. It can transcribe the conversation instantly, as you saw. It can take documents using OCR and convert that into text. It can tag speakers, can translate, can provide context. It can resolve names and connect them to other things that you know in your organization. It can connect them to things in the external world. You can find relationships. All of these things are very easy to do in the near term. There's even a project at Google called Backlight that is doing some of this. Longer term, we can do very powerful things like automatic summarization to produce different versions of what is being said so that you can pass it on to other people. You can find related content. You can identify claims, and you can fact-check those claims in real time and respond to the person you're talking to immediately. You can answer questions. The system can answer questions to you and that you don't know the answers to, but maybe it's out there. You can even suggest questions to ask the person you're talking to. So I imagine a situation in the future where you're interviewing somebody and you're wearing something that is talking to your phone, and the AI, edge AI on your phone is able to listen to the conversation and is able to provide you inputs in real time. You know, 5 years ago, she actually said the opposite. This is what she said. Ask her the question right away, right? So this is the promise. Lastly, let me talk about what it means to bring AI into the workforce. And some of you have real-time experience, have real-world experience in this. You've actually installed AI in your newsroom. But I want us to think a little bit further and think about what it really means. Computing in the past was about bringing in a machine that did one specific thing. But now it's much more like bringing in an employee, somebody who is a knowledge worker, who has superpowers and is a specialist in a specific area, and you want to lean on them every now and then to get something done. Or you want to use them to scale your efforts, right? And part of that is coming in, as employees do, they don't understand everything about your business. You know, the AI models that get built outside have to be fine-tuned in your environment to work in your domain, to do the things that you want, to perform the tasks you want. So this requires a special kind of skill in the newsroom, which you may or may not have yet, and has something you have to think about. You can also build AI models to train AI models. So if you want to extract tables from scanned documents, right? Well, one way to do that is to have an AI that produces artificial scanned documents that have tables in them that trains the other system. And the trainer and the trainee can be trained simultaneously. Other thing we can do is combine learnings that come from many sources. The technology companies are building in edge AI into phones so that they can pick up on a number of signals and learn about things that are specific to that user, and can also enhance the global model. And one question to ask the technology companies is, if they're building it for themselves, why not have publishers also participate? Lastly, I want to say, teaching AI systems about our domain is kind of an unknown space. You know, we're starting to make some progress in that. An example of this is, if you think about Robert Mueller, who's investigating the Russia interference in the elections, you would imagine that in his head or in a whiteboard, there was some kind of mind map that said, this is what happened, here's how people are connected. Every journalist has a mind map like this about the story they're pursuing. Now imagine combining the mind maps of all journalists, not just living, but also the ones that published in the past. What kind of incredible resource could that be, and how might we use that, right? Something like this is already happening, right? People are building AI systems based on all the content in Wikipedia, all the news archives, legal archives, scientific papers, and so forth. And there is an incredible wealth of knowledge that's now baked into these neural networks that come from work that's been done in the past, right? And they can be used to transform content based in a very domain-specific way, like transcription that I mentioned earlier. It can also be used as a form of associative memory. If you go to a veteran journalist and you ask them about a name, not only will they understand who that person is and tell you a lot about them, they can also give you a lot of connections and related objects, the artifacts. The same thing is now possible with language embeddings. So you can take all this content, throw it in, throw all the documents you have in your system, and then you can ask a question about some connection or some person or some organization, and just like our human associative memory works, this organizational associative memory can give you a number of related things that you didn't know existed. Imagine what the resources can be for investigative journalism. At Stanford, I'm part of something called the Journalism and Democracy Initiative, and we're starting to look at how computing can be used in every stage of this process, right? From sourcing from various avenues, online and offline, analysis, trying to derive a story from it, trying to produce artifacts that you can share cost effectively to different platforms and different channels, to distribute this in a optimal way, to fund it, and also finally to look at the environment and understand how journalism is impacting the world and the world is impacting journalism. So to summarize, I think journalism is like the backbone of democracy, yeah? And if you're in the business of helping people build a true and accurate picture of the world they live in, not a distorted one, not one where things far away look like they're close by, then you are supporting democracy. Otherwise, you're in the entertainment business. And I think there are many ways in which AI, which has been a threat to democracy, can be turned around and used to both defend democracy via an immune response by finding misinformation and stopping it and debunking it, but also strengthening the core practice of democracy, of journalism, which is to do an in-depth analysis that allows you to give a true and accurate narrative, not something that's facile and easy to generate. Lastly, I think you should think really hard about what the next decade is going to mean as digital employees come into a newsroom. Not to take away jobs from journalists, but actually to give them superpowers, to be a buddy, to be a resource. And how are they going to be integrated? How are they going to be trained? Will the large newsrooms have all the benefits? Will the small newsrooms fall behind? These are huge questions. And I think it's time to start thinking about what exactly it means to bring AI into your newsroom. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. You know that you will have the opportunity to have more questions and close contact with Krishna just right now or in a while at the lighthouse. So if you have more questions, I'm sure you will meet Krishna in a while in the lighthouse. Thank you so much.